Hi everyone. I said I'd post or make a series of posts about Gothic literature. I decided to do it by video because there's just too much to say to fit into the captions. So let's get started. So before jumping into the book I'd like to share with you, I think we should probably talk a little bit about Gothic literature in general. So Gothic literature is a literary genre which rose to prominence in the 18th century. The term Gothic historically refers to a style of architecture that was popular in the medieval period. So let's talk about the first ever Gothic novel, which is The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. It was published in 1764, and it was the first to call itself Gothic with the word Gothic in the title. And this genre-defining tale has all or almost all of the hallmarks of a good Gothic novel, which are. So here we're going into the elements of Gothic literature. I'm sure you recognize many or some of these from stories, books, films that you may have watched. And so number one would be the castle or the great house, where everything takes place. It's usually a decaying, crumbling manor or something of the sort. It's haunted or it has secret passageways, trapdoors, mysterious architecture. Either way, the house or castle in a Gothic novel is considered to be one of the most important elements of the Gothic story and almost a character in itself. Moving on to number two on the list of Gothic elements would be nature. And here we're talking about wild, unrestrained, dramatic nature, which is there to express and externalize the hidden passions of the protagonist. And a good example of this would be the Yorkshire moors in Wuthering Heights or the storm in Jane Eyre. And that brings us to metonymy. Metonymy, if you're not familiar with that, is a subtype of a metaphor, which something, for example, the rain, is used to stand for something else like sorrow. A very good example of this would be in films when there's a funeral, it's always raining. And this is supposed to tell you that this is a very sad scene, there's, very, very tragic. So it's a shortcut, it's a sort of code for you to know, hey, this is a scene where you're supposed to be sad. So that does tie in with the weather in Gothic novels. Another important element in Gothic literature would be the past. And the past is there to haunt you. The past is there to come and bite you in the ass. The past is something you cannot escape. So that feeds into the whole family legacy, prophecies, omens. Your ancestors have done something to somebody. Now there's a curse, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, so the past, you can't escape it. And then one of the most important aspects also of a Gothic novel is the main character. And this should be a very powerful main character with a strong, dominant personality if possible. Sometimes, a lot of times it is a man. It's not necessarily true for all Gothic fiction, which, for example, Wuthering Heights is considered Gothic romance, and Cathy is definitely the dominant one, as opposed to Heathcliff also, but Cathy is definitely no, shrinking violet. And now that we're talking about Heathcliff, we can actually also talk about the Byronic hero, which is something of a stereotype that came about based on Lord Byron, the poet, the Romantic poet, and he was supposed to be this really like compelling hero type personality. He, it's in quotes, it's a man proud, moody, cynical, with defiance on his brow and misery in his heart, a scorner of his kind, implacable in revenge, yet capable of deep and strong affection. So what we have here is basically the portrait of Mr. Rochester in Jane Eyre. So he would be someone you can call a Byronic hero. So this sort of anti-hero hero was a big part of Gothic fiction, where they're sort of morally ambiguous. They're not exactly the clean cut, goody goody two shoes hero that we are used to. Um, Although those heroes do exist, and you'll see in the book I'm about to share with you. But there is this sort of popularity of the Byronic, complicated, dark, tortured, troubled hero. And yeah, so Lord Byron, the poet, he fit this archetype very well. He personified it, but also I would just like to point out that he's posthumously he's considered by many to have been bipolar. So this sort of up and down, intense personality that was very romanticized in the 19th century could have just been a symptom of bipolar disorder. Okay, the last item on the big elements of Gothic fiction list would be isolation or confinement. This is kind of a recurring theme where you see the protagonist in a situation where they're cut off from everyone else, from civilization. It's about being trapped and the terror that inspires. For example, Frankenstein, he is beached in the Arctic Circle. He's isolated. Rear Window, which is sort of a neo-Gothic Hitchcock film, he is isolated because he is wheelchair bound. He cannot physically move. Um, the windy moors of Wuthering Heights, once again, serves to sort of cut them off from everyone else. They live in the middle of nowhere. Many haunted house, stories are take place in a very isolated location, the house on Haunted Hill. I mean, it's a hill, and then I'm guessing there's other people around, but it's pretty isolated in terms of, them being on top of a hill. So there's also cases of the protagonist, the heroines, usually sort of the damsel in distress, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but she's locked away somewhere. Jane in the Red Room by Mrs. Reed, Emily Saint-Aubert in the Castle of Udolpho, which is I'm about to share with you. She's been locked away, sequestered, because this evil man, who is the typical villain in Gothic novel, is out to get her and her fortune. So he wants to, he traps her, he locks her up in this Gothic castle. So that is a big part of the Gothic literary canon, code, symbols, elements. And some other mainstays of Gothic fiction, which are not necessarily something you have to have, but are very common, and you might see these tropes in other Gothic influenced works, are, for example, twins or doubles, sort of a mysterious supernatural element there, and you might have seen it in, for example, The Shining, which is definitely Gothic inspired, if not Gothic. A big crumbling hotel in the middle of nowhere, isolated by the weather, so definitely Gothic. The damsel in distress, which is also an element I've talked about already. She's usually the heroine. She's usually virginal. She's, pure and innocent, and she faints a lot. There's like this fainting scale where you can tell how Gothic a novel is by how many times the the damsel in distress faints. Yeah, so there's definitely that element of a woman, a young woman, usually very young, 20, that sort of thing. She's waiting to be rescued by, the hero. So there's the foreboding, brooding, sinister atmosphere in general. And a lot of books will have that, if not everything else. They may not have the crumbling castle, they may not have the supernatural element, but they will have this overwhelming, foreboding, sinister atmosphere that just is very oppressive. And that's what makes it Gothic, even though there's no monster. There's usually dysfunctional family. That kind of ties into the past catching up to bite you in the ass. These families, they're like, I can think of a couple off the top of my head, would be Bellefleur from Joyce Carol Oates, just crumbling manor house, lots of, extended family. They're all just eccentric and weird and all to get each other. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, another effed up family. So you have that. You have Omens and Curses, as we've talked about, also relating to the dysfunctional family. Romance. So that is an element of it. There's a subgenre called Gothic romance, in which Wuthering Heights would fit. Jane Eyre also would fit into this. But also the book I'm about to share with you today is a Gothic romance. Um, yes, there's usually a hero and, there's a love story. There's a villain in this book I'm about to present to you, has all these emotional distress, obviously nightmares, self-explanatory. The anti-hero, which is the Byronic, the complex hero that's not quite a hero. He's sort of, morally ambiguous, interferes in psychological instability, a lot of gaslighting going on in these books, especially of women, obviously, sort of feeling like you're losing your sanity. You don't know what's going on. Is this real? Is this not real? Am I imagining things? A lot of haunted horror. Gothic falls into this category. The good versus evil, and that also ties in with the religion spirituality. Um, there are a lot of books about good versus evil, and supernatural beings being on the evil side. For example, Twilight, a very popular Gothic YA romance, which became a movie, is all about good, evil, being on the good side, the right side, the supernatural elements, etc. So that's definitely a modern Gothic novel. But I will definitely talk more about modern contemporary Gothic novels in another video. I hope you were able to understand at least some of what I was saying, and sorry if it wasn't very clear. I had an interesting time researching this, and thanks for watching. So now let's talk about this book, which is the one I'd like to share with you today. It's The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, who was a very prominent Gothic writer, and this book was groundbreaking and scandalous when it was published in 1794, so yeah, quite old. It's a quintessential Gothic romance. It tells the story of Emily Saint-Aubert, who is sadly orphaned when her mother and father die. And, they were really lovely parents. They were such a happy family. It's a very Cinderella type story in the beginning. And she's taken in by her cruel, cold aunt, who later marries an even crueler and colder, dubious Italian nobleman of strange, mysterious origins. And it's often cited as the Gothic novel. The Mysteries of Udolpho features prominently in Jane Austen's 1817 novel, Northanger Abbey, if you are an Austen's fan. In that book, which is actually a parody of the Gothic genre, Catherine Morland, the protagonist, she, reads all these Gothic novels and she's such a fan and she's such a wild imagination that she imagines herself into all these crazy scenarios, like all her family, like all these people around her are trying to get to her because she has an overactive imagination, which has been stimulated by reading all these Gothic romances, which were popular at the time. So, if you're interested in Gothic fiction, you might find the Austen novel interesting as well. It's kind of it's a funny satire, pastiche, parody of the Gothic genre. So this book has everything. So it's, one of the groundbreaking, genre-defining books in the Gothic canon. So therefore, you have all of the elements that we just talked about, and I will give you a checklist. So there is the Great Castle House. The name of the book is The Castle of Otranto. It takes place in a big castle with trapdoors and secret passageways and what have you, all the things that we look for in a good Gothic novel. Um, there is untamed nature, all these things to a certain degree. There is the supernatural or fake supernatural, you know, I won't spoil it for you. Metonomy, the sublime, intense emotion, emotions, intense fear, the past, powerful main character. Well, Emily Saint-Aubert is a girl who is very sweet and innocent, and I wouldn't say she's like a proto-feminist or anything. She's mostly a very nice girl. She's very kind. She's very kind. That's really what she is. She's almost like those, Dickensian female characters where they're just really sweet, like the one from A Tale of Two Cities. Who was it, like Lucy or something? Anyway, so she's very, very kind, sweet, versional girl, the heroine. Um, and there is actually a villain. So the villain his name is Montoni. He's the guy the aunt marries, and he's just out for their fortune. So he just tries to manipulate and physically bully them into giving over their fortunes. And so he throws, Emily into like a room and like he locks her up, and it's very that's the Gothic part of it, definitely. There's definitely so the damsel in distress. There's the foreboding, brooding, sinister atmosphere. The dysfunctional family, obviously. There's the romance. So her love interest is a guy she meets on the road, because actually only a third of the novel takes place in the castle. His name is Varancourt, and he is the hero. He's gonna come and get Emily and save her, rescue her from this crumbling castle. And so yeah, obviously he's the romantic hero. Montoni is the villain. There's another guy, another count or whatever. He wants to that Montoni actually tries to force Emily to marry because he wants the title, the money. But it turns out this other guy has no money, so that was a wash. Um, yeah, nightmares, anti-hero, psychological instability, good versus evil. I would, yes, this has got it all. If you're into, you know, gothic romance type books, um, there is a good, there is a audible, not audible, an audio book that I found for free on not Gutenberg, the other one, LibriVox. So if you're more into listening to books, and this is quite a long book, as you can see, you can, you know, try to listen to it, which is what I did, and it was much more maybe exciting. This is a nice edition, but the print is kind of small. So, I mean, and it's got how many? Almost 1,000 pages, 900 pages, something like that. 874 pages. So, and this is actually part of a series by Penguin, which is called, I don't know if it's called that, but it says More Heroines, Hauntings, and Highwaymen. And the first one on the list is Lady Audley's Secret. Number 2 is Paul Clifford. There's Jack Sheppard, The String of Pearls, The Woman in White, which is another great Gothic novel from the 19th century. The Moonstone by the same author. The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is the one we just talked about. A Sicilian Romance. The Castle of Otranto, which is the first. Oh wait, yeah. So that was the very, very first. Yeah, very, very first Gothic novel in 1764, and The Monk, which is another very famous one. So there you have it. I don't even know if this video can be this long, but we'll see. And next time we'll talk about more modern Gothic fiction.